Hello, everyone. My name is Naresh Idala. Thank you for joining me today. In the last 2 weeks, we saw a black man being murdered by the police. His name was George Floyd. This sparked protests throughout the world calling for change. The Quidditch community has not been immune to those calls. These last 2 weeks has seen the issue of race and specifically the African American community in Quidditch. Here tonight, we have 5 guests that have accepted the invite to talk about the black athlete in Quidditch. This roundtable discussion is for education and to learn about experiences that these guests have faced in this community. The goal is to listen and to learn and to hopefully use this platform to create change in the community. And with that, I would like to introduce our guests.
Hi, my name is Tyler Walker, current coach or captain of New York Nocturnes. I've been playing Quidditch for about 8 seasons now, and back in 2016 and 2018, I had the opportunity to be a member of Team USA.
Hello, everybody. My name is James Hicks. I started playing Quidditch in 2011. The most recent team I was affiliated with was DCQC, District of Columbia Quidditch Club. I was the player on the first Team USA in 2012, and I was the head coach for Team USA in 2016.
Hi, I'm Natasha Connerly. I started playing Quidditch in 2013 with DCU, and most recently I was their assistant coach. But I'll be playing with DCQC in the fall. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Katrina Bynum. I started playing Quidditch in 2012 with the University of Maryland. I'm currently playing with Penn State right now, and I'm also a year-round volunteer for USQ since about 2013.
I'm Tafik Abbas. I started playing in 2015 with Michigan State University, and most recently I played with Chicago United. I was going to be the assistant coach for Detroit Innovators in MLQ, had it actually gone off, so.
And so with that, we're going to begin this roundtable. How would you describe the landscape of Quidditch when you first joined to where we are now?
I can start. Quidditch is like a pretty white sport. I don't think there's really any way beating around the bush there. I think someone in one of the forums recently said that, the kind of book that we're going off of doesn't really give it any props or any really help in that regard. I mean, that's true. There's really no major characters of color within Harry Potter. But still the sport has done an incredible job, in my opinion, of the issues of, facing the LGBT community, as well as women empowerment. And so I guess what I've seen kind of recently is an issue of, Black Lives Matter. We're seeing that across the country, and Quidditch doesn't really have an answer for that. And really kind of looking back, hasn't really made that a priority. I think USQ called it a blind spot, and I think that was kind of the perfect phrasing for kind of how that's been going, is it's kind of just been put in the back burner. The story I always kind of go to is about 3 or 4 years ago, another black player on my team, we were looking across at one of the first tournaments of the season, and she was just there's a lot of black people here. And I was yeah, there's at least one per team. And that was kind of what we had seen in our 3 or 4 years at that point as growth from the black community in Quidditch. And I think that's kind of just been, and at least in my experience, that's kind of been pretty symbolic of what we've achieved so far in that community.
I can go next. So when you look at those numbers that Tyler brought up, and there's been a lot of talk about numbers these days and percentages and things like that. So when I started in 2011, it looked very similar. You'd maybe see maybe one black player on another team. Same thing, you go to tournaments, predominantly white players, predominantly white teams, and then you'd see that maybe 1 or 2 other black players at the tournament, and then you automatically form that bond. I think it's a little different now. So I think that's the reason why it somehow got pushed to the back burner. But I really think that if you look at the number of teams that have been made and the way Quidditch has grown, I don't think the percentage of black players has grown along with that. I think USQ probably sees like there are more Black players in USQ, but based on the growth of the teams and the growth of the amount of players, I don't think the growth has been that substantial. So I really think that this is a good time for people to start speaking up. And like, thank you, Tyler, for like bringing this up in groups and everything, because I really think there can be more done to promote Black players in Quidditch.
So I was talking to a few friends last week, and they brought up how when they first told their parents that they were playing Quidditch, the reactions were, "Oh yeah, like that's awesome, that's pretty cool." But for me, I am an Indian player. Telling my parents I was playing Quidditch it wasn't a good experience. They haven't seen me play Quidditch yet in my 4 years of Rutgers, so that's one of those things where I'm just like, well, it is what it is. But how do you think that Quidditch as a sport, as the way we I guess maybe describe ourselves, or maybe the sport in general, do you think that's conducive to like a player of color, or do you think how do you think that reflects, how do you think the sport reflects towards initially getting the Black athlete?
Well, I know with my family, they think it's the most ridiculous thing ever. I mean, they felt it was kind of on brand for the extracurriculars I was involved in, because I was in chess club in high school. But like, they were like, when you just say the name, they're like, oh, what's that? And then when you explain, like, it's a sport where it's like, it's physical, it's co-ed, and you have a stick between your legs, that's when you slowly start to lose them. At least in my family. I don't really want to speak for everyone else's. And like, you know, I finally got my mom to come to a tournament one time in like 2014, I think. And she has not been to one since, because she was never really a sports person in general. But she just thought it was ridiculous. And it's kind of been that way with my whole family. Like, no other family members have come to tournaments, but just describing it, like me trying to pull up videos on like YouTube and stuff, they just check out entirely.
So, when I first told my mom that I had started playing Quidditch, she thought I had joined the Wiccan Club and was kind of upset with me. But as far as like getting her to see it as a sport and like, I guess, like, understand how I spend my weekends, it's been a process for sure. And as, you know, as far as trying to get other Black people or people of color involved with the sport, when you tell them, oh, it's from Harry Potter, a lot of them are just kind of like, okay. And then when you pull up videos or try to get them to come out to a practice, and then it's all they see is white people there too, it's just, I can tell it's also kind of a turn off for them, and they're like, oh, so this isn't something we do, essentially.
So I guess, I'm sorry, Tyler, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, like, I mean, to kind of speak on like the Black community as like a whole, like being kind of like in, you know, quote unquote white activities is kind of always like a sore spot. Like, I mean, I personally, like growing up, you know, I was told by white and Black people that, like, you know, I talk white, you know, and that's something that is, I think a lot of people, like, especially in Quidditch, you know, like we were more educated, had the opportunity to be more educated, go to college than a lot of, like, you know, other people who look like us in this country. And, you know, for you to go to this sport and that is going to be predominantly white, that in itself is kind of like a stigma, barrier to entry, something along those lines, because it's something that you're going to have to come back to, you know, your friends and be like, oh yeah, I play Quidditch, and, you know, open up the opportunity for you to get roasted, for you to get, like, you know, made fun of, whatever kind of like phrase you want to use there. And I mean, for like the Black side of my family, they've never totally understood it. Like they understood that, like, I play a sport, I've tried to understand the sport, and like when I've had like the opportunity to get them to like a practice or something like that, they love it. They think it's awesome. They compare it to like basketball, soccer, something along those lines. But like when you think about it and you hear a sport based off of Quidditch, like it immediately goes obviously to Harry Potter. And I mean, then, you know, when you kind of back that up with the representation, I think we've seen it just kind of feeds into that and makes it tough for, you know, someone of color to come into the sport and be like, this feels like something that I can easily like kind of like integrate myself into.
Yeah, I like to like speak to that as well. So my parents are sports people. So when I told them about Quidditch, they didn't know what it was. Like I don't think I watched the Harry Potter movie or anything until like the year before I started playing Quidditch. They didn't know what it was, but they came out the first time and saw it, and they're sports people, so like they were kind of into it. Like my dad drove out to a tournament when I was home in New York one weekend. My mom actually flew out to London to watch me play for Team USA in 2012. So like they were always very accepting of it. But the thing is, like I grew up in the Bronx, and that was like me and my friends were always, you know, we play basketball all day in the summer and everything. Um, when I lived in the Bronx and grew up there, all my friends were black. Then when I started posting like pictures of like Quidditch and everything, they're like, man, what the hell is this? Like, it's crazy. But the thing is, in the beginning, when they would watch videos of it, they're like, man, you got a broom between your legs. Like, what is this? But to be honest, now when they watch it and they see how far it's gone, and they got rid of the broom with the bristles and everything, that's when they're kind of more accepting of it. If there's one thing about us, we don't want to go out and do an activity that's going to make us look kind of ridiculous. And to be honest, and when Quidditch started, we were playing with those brooms with the bristles on them. We did look kind of ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie, but like it's different now, and I think it's more accepting to people, more accepting to athletes to be able to go out and see it being played. So that definitely helps. But I know a lot of people who just their parents or family was just really not into it, and their friends would roast them for playing it, and that's also a part that keeps black players out of Quidditch.
I guess in the Northeast, East Coast, especially for New Jersey, where I go to Rutgers, it's one of the most diverse colleges in the entire country, and our Rutgers team is, I think we're a majority. 51% of our team is a player of color, and I think that's absolutely amazing.
Wow.
And I don't see too many teams like that. So I guess this is a two-pronged question, but the first question is where Tyler, Tafik, and I'm not sure if I can't speak to the other guests that we have right now. What do you think other regions are like? Where Tyler and Tafik, you played at Michigan State. Tyler, you played your college career at Ball State. How do you think these other regions are in terms of how they treat their black athlete or just a player of color? Have you ever noticed the difference between the Midwest Great Lakes versus the Northeast Mid-Atlantic?
Tyler, you can go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I've had an opportunity to play in just about every region of the country. And I guess to kind of start off, like Quidditch, like discrimination doesn't look like the same that you're kind of thinking of, like with maybe Confederate flags or like All Lives Matter, you know, like KKK hoods. Like that's not how like any experience I've ever had like in Quidditch has been. It's different though, like, and it's still there. It's a lot more of like microaggressions, like, you know, like I was lucky enough that there were a pretty good amount of black players. Like when I joined Ball State, I think I was like one of 4. And that was because one of our founding members was black. Shout out to Elizabeth Hibbler, who started Ball State Quidditch. And she, you know, she made that a priority to make sure they're people of color, and she would check in with those players as well throughout the season. And, you know, what I've seen more is something like kind of offhanded comments like, you know, you're one of the best black players. You know, you're this, but you're not this. You know, you like kind of even like the same stuff was like, you know, you're talking white. I had like, honestly, like thinking back, like I remember there was a time when there were like 4 Tylers on the team. And honestly, like I think that could have went a lot differently had I been the only black player on that team, where I could have been delegated to the black Tyler. But, you know, I was only called by my last name, which honestly like was huge with keeping me in the sport. And there's just a lot of experiences kind of like that. I think it's kind of been like coined like sorority racism, that, you know, you kind of have like those microaggressions. where it's not the same thing. It's not as confrontational, like as something I've experienced like outside of Quidditch, where like I've been told like you're not welcome here, something like that. But you know, when it's something that a community, especially that you're trying to be included in, and you see so much inclusion around, that can be a huge hit. That like one statement that is like offhanded, that you know a lot of people would be well-meaning or you know don't think it's offensive, that could completely turn you know a player away from this sport, the team, you know, like that group of people in general, who realistically like have the opportunity and like I think have like the kind of the heart and the mindset to be like some of the biggest allies for the Black community. I've seen that now that like this has become an issue. But you know, like I've also seen kind of the opposite side of that, where it isn't a priority and it's kind of like butt of a joke or kind of like an offhanded comment like that.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head. Like, I mean, so MSU is a Big Ten school. It's got about 50,000 students. I don't know about Rutgers. Rutgers is probably, I would imagine, similar.
About the same.
Yeah. So, I mean, MSU, when I joined, had just Nico Banks. I think he was the only player of color on the team. And then when I joined, I guess, like, I was an additional member. But I mean, I can't remember, like, really anything directly being said. Like, yeah, we had maybe some people, like, around, like, 2016 where things got a bit more heated. Like, we had one really conservative member, but they never really said anything, like, directly or anything like that, or anything that I like can like retroactively interpret as a microaggression. But I mean, I definitely think that we didn't necessarily support our players of color, because I think a lot of the ones that we had actually we didn't retain. I remember Justin Baldwin, who joined the year I joined, and he stopped playing for some reason. And then we had Horatio Hampton, like I think a year or two later, who also stopped playing. So I think we've generally, like, even at MSU, which generally prides itself on being very supportive of every member of the student population, we haven't done. I don't think we've done even a good job of like supporting our players of color.
So,
No, Natasha, keep going. I'm sorry.
sorry. Like I said earlier, I started off at VCU. We're a fairly large school. I think we have about 40,000 students. And we're also pretty diverse, about 50% white, 50% non-white. However, that, especially in recent years, it hasn't been as reflected in the team. When I first started, we did have quite a few Black players and a couple players of color. But like since then, it's definitely declined. And one thing I would run into a lot is Tyler was talking about inclusion. It was more of an exclusion. It would feel like, I guess, so oftentimes when there are a lot of white people in a space and only one or two Black people, they kind of forget we're there. And sometimes they'll, you know, make jokes, realize you're there, look over at you, and then say, oh, wait, no, I didn't mean it like that, or, oh, I'm sorry about that. Like, I remember one time my team went to a party at Virginia Tech, and somebody started writing the N-word on the wall, and his friend, like, nudged him and pointed at me, and then he turned around, and he was like, oh, my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't even know you were there. And I was like, it's not me being here should not be the issue. You shouldn't be doing this in the first place. And you know, when I told some of my teammates about it, it was just kind of like, oh, well, they're probably not used to having Black people around, or, oh, it was just kidding. And it's like, that's not a joke. It's not funny. It shouldn't be happening in the first place. So it's just smaller things. I guess they forget how to conduct themselves, for lack of a better phrase. So, you know, I guess one thing that going forward I would like to see is more consciousness of players of color, of Black players too.
Yeah, and like a really good point about quote unquote racism in Quidditch, especially if you're like one of the only Black players on the team. Just those little jokes um, that kind of like they don't kind of view as harmful. I mean, I went to University of Maryland, and University of Maryland is University of Maryland. You see what you get, but it's just those little jokes, like if it starts getting dark out, oh, you can't see them anymore, or blah blah blah. And like if there's if you have a Black male and a Black female on the team, everyone's like, oh, when you guys want to get together and blah blah blah. Just like small things like that they think are like funny little jokes that they don't know can be really insensitive. And to be honest, a lot of us, when we're confronted with jokes like that, especially in a space that's predominantly white, will usually like, haha, just laugh it off and kind of move on about it. And I don't think a lot of us, I can only speak for myself. I know I didn't speak up for myself and tell people that I didn't appreciate those jokes back then. I would now, but back then that's not something I did. And I think a lot of Black players in Quidditch go through those things. So in terms of educating the community, I really think that we should start telling other players, white players, that those small jokes that you may just be joking around that you don't think have an effect, those really aren't okay, even though we may not speak up for ourselves all the time.
And
I will
as far as, oh, sorry.
No, you can go.
Well, just the thing about speaking up, it does get exhausting having to be the person constantly speaking up, though. So I would like to see more white players calling each other out because, like I said, first of all, it's exhausting. And then second, I don't want to become the person who always has to have an issue or the person who's always angry and things like that, even though I shouldn't have to call it out. So, and for a newer player, they might not feel comfortable calling it out. They might just leave. So I definitely think that's something that should be corrected. And sorry, Katrina, you were speaking.
You're fine. You're fine. No, I was gonna say, like for the most part, I feel like very fortunate to have experienced like teammates that, for the most part, were very respectful, at least in front of me. You never know what's going on behind closed doors. But I remember it was just like one time at practice when I was still on the Honey Badgers, I like made like a joke to myself and didn't realize anyone had heard it. And it was like a self-deprecating Black joke. And so I had whispered it, but someone had heard me, and it just like opened the floodgates after that. And one of my biggest regrets is that I never said like, hey, maybe we should, not do this as much, because like it's like what Natasha and Jane said, it's like it kept going and just kept snowballing. And it actually got to the point where like I'd heard that one of my teammates had said like what was like actually a legitimately racist joke about Black people to someone behind my back, and that like, and I remember like I fought so hard to try to explain to people like why that was so problematic, like why it made me so uncomfortable, and it was just so frustrating because no one would listen. And it was one of the reasons that I ultimately wound up deciding to take a break from Quidditch for a whole year, because I just was so frustrated between like that player's behavior and then like another player's behavior, and neither of them facing consequences for their discriminatory behavior.
Going back to, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I know James, Katrina, Tyler, I know everyone that you guys have said, all the comments that you guys have said, where just these little comments that teammates would say, and that's a shame, because obviously teammates are people that you want on your side at all times. Like you want them to be loyal to you at all times, and that's quite disheartening to hear that. But something that I saw on AQD recently was, James, your comment about how people would maybe comment about Natasha. Would you guys mind going into that? Because I don't want to put words, I don't want to spin any of that situation. I want to hear it straight from your experiences.
So something about Natasha, and there are a lot of players in the league that are like very scrappy players. I'm not gonna lie, I coach Natasha. She was my teammate. Every now and then I have to be like, hey, like Natasha, you need to like reel it back in a little bit. But there are players who kind of play the line, and sometimes they go over the line, and I mean they get carded for it. That means they play hard, they play scrappy, they don't intentionally try to hurt people. Those kind of players, when you take someone that looks like Natasha and someone who's a white player, they get ref differently. The community feels a different way about them. One side might get praised like, oh, they're such a scrappy player. They get carded, but that means they're just trying hard. They're going for the win and everything. They have like this killer mentality on the field. But then Natasha does something and you get labeled, oh, she's just an angry person, or she's a dirty player. And I don't think that's fair. You have two of the same types of players that get labeled differently. I don't want to say based on how they look, but I do think that has something to do with it. I've seen it throughout her whole career, and I felt that way when she was on VCU, and I felt that way when she was on VCQC. And I really don't think that's fair. And I really think a lot of people in the community haven't been fair to her in that regard.
I mean, to kind of speak on, not that specifically, but just kind of like more in generals. I mean, we have a rule book that is like largely based around like the intention of what a player is doing, you know, like how the refs are supposed to ref that way, that they are supposed to like look at a player and say, did they intentionally like, you know, kick that second bludger they're holding, or was that an accident? And that's how they're supposed to delegate the cards. And that's, I mean, that is really dangerous, especially considering that, yeah, there's a huge stigma against Black people as being dangerous or more dangerous than white people. And when that kind of is like put out there as propaganda that's been, you know, proliferated for like last couple hundred years, that makes Black people seem more dangerous when they are interacting the exact same ways as white people are. And when you add that intention, now you're kind of like asking that ref in that moment to go against their biases that are inherent, have been there, you know, for a couple hundred years, to, you know, kind of pull themselves out of that. And I mean, I think that's really dangerous for a community that is trying to like go against discrimination, to kind of have that play so heavily into the outcome of games and the outcome of even individual interactions like that. And so, I mean, yeah, that was just kind of another example of like kind of a way we can take like a harder look into Quidditch and kind of how that is, that specific kind of adage to the rulebook is being implemented.
I think I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit in that, I mean, I had the fortune of playing with Tyler Walker at like around the time he made Team USA, so this might be a little bit different, but like even when we talk about like, for example, like the eighth man or other people who talk about Quidditch in a analytical kind of sense, right? Like we don't really find that, like typically in my experience, a lot of players of color or black players are pretty athletic that enter the sport given previous experiences with sports, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that athleticism is necessarily as lauded, right, in Black players. Like I haven't seen it really as much. Like you can read eighth man articles, or you can read, I mean, maybe Team USA like little like blurbs or something about players, but like it's not lauded or valued as much. Whereas there's a clear like maybe difference in like, okay, this player like plays like they have high IQ plays, and it's like, well, I mean, it's a big double standard in my opinion that I've seen.
And you know what? That's a perfect segue into exactly what I was going to talk about, where, Tyler, you were part of the Eighth Man as a media analyst for a while. How do you think, as Tafik just pointed out, where certain players are just labeled a certain way, and whether that be the scrappy and just hard-nosed, like what James was talking about, but then that same level of play is deemed dirty by other people. So it's, what do you think needs to change in terms of the media and the way that is presented to the Quidditch community? Because right now the Eighth Man is quite honestly the only active media, I guess, media platform for Quidditch.
I mean, it's pretty much the only one. I mean, Face Beat It still does produce some stuff, but I think they've like really shifted their focus to the West Coast. I mean, it's all about representation. I mean, Tafik definitely pointed it out. I remember one of the first articles that like I was specifically mentioned in was at the beginning of the Q season, and all I was talked about, I think it was like some like ball of athleticism or like ball of muscle or something like that. And I was like about to coach the team, and I was like, okay, so I guess that's my only attribute that is relevant for that entire team. I mean, I think in general, like this sport has tried to make like not storylines but like kind of narratives like off of stuff, and they focus like on a few players. And I mean, like having been in the eighth man specifically, I mean they definitely put like their own personal preferences into kind of how those player storylines are treated, you know, based on like people's personal experiences of those specific players. So when you have like one media source, even though like they are changing who's at the top, and I think that's huge, that Ethan Warren is taking over there, you still only have this one form to take Quidditch information, take an analysis on the Quidditch community from. I mean, that is not something that like is really the eighth man's job to fix. I think they are doing a good job of trying to add more inclusion and diversity into their staff. But at the end of the day, I mean, there needs to be like the Face Beaded or some other media entity needs to come up to kind of be able to say, hey, when eighth man is like not posting about this player, hey, we're going to post about this player. And I mean, like specifically, that's something that like I mean, BQC has, Black Quidditch Coalition has talked about doing, is highlighting like those players within the community that aren't getting enough recognition. But I mean, I think in general, like the eighth man does try to do what they try to do, which is to promote the sport of Quidditch in an analytical sense. I just unfortunately feel like there's been a lot of like personal biases that from a lot of like the same people that have kind of affected how we're seeing the sport of Quidditch, at least in the media.
Yeah,
No, I'm sorry. Keep going.
yeah, I would actually agree with Tyler because I think, to my knowledge, most of the people that write articles for the Eighth Man are like pretty much located mainly on the East Coast, and like I think Mansfield is based in the Southwest region right now, right? So that like leads to a lot of skewing of like what sample of players you're looking at already, right? Like the Midwest, or I guess Great Lakes, was kind of like already considered like flyover zone for some time. And then now that like the Eighth Man is like, the writers are mainly from two particular regions where that's really all the coverage that happens. It's like, well, I mean, that's the only storyline that's going to happen. And I don't really see that. Sure, Ethan is is an editor in chief, but he's at the end of the day also from that one of those two regions. So I don't think that is necessarily going to result in as much change as I would like, but I mean, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic.
So branching off of that, I know we talked about Eighth Man as the main media platform. What do you guys think that United States Quidditch (USQ) should be doing in terms of actually making the sport more inclusive to all races, all genders? And I know they've done a great job with the gender inclusivity of the sport, but so I guess in terms of the race aspect of it.
I can start. I mean, one of the biggest things that I've seen, and Nocturnes has as one of like their big missions, is trying to decrease the barrier to entry. One of the biggest being like financially. I mean, I know like the biggest sports that I grew up playing, and a lot of Black people grew up playing, are sports that are very easily accessible. You think about basketball, all you really need to go out and play basketball is a basketball and a court where you can find relatively easy. Football, very similar. You know, you can go out in the yard with like another person, a couple people, and realistically play a game of football. Baseball does not have that, and I mean, I think that's a big reason we've seen like within baseball like a declining of African American players in baseball, because it's really not that accessible of a sport, and I don't want to see Quidditch going that way. You know, to realistically go out and even practice Quidditch, you need some set of hoops, which are generally not easy to transport, especially not by yourself, and especially if you live in a major city, that becomes even more of a hurdle. You know, you have all of the financial travel that you have to do that realistically just comes directly out of pocket, / any fundraising your team does that tries to offset that cost. I mean, so financially, that's been one of the biggest things that I've seen, and like Nocturnes as well, I've seen and been really trying to combat this year, is decreasing that like financial barrier to entry, making this something that, you know, a player or a future player randomly could just like see and be like, okay, I'm just gonna like, oh, you're doing that next Saturday? Okay, I'll show up to that. Awesome. Like, and we can, you know, give them a test run of the sport. And so I think that's like one of the biggest things. And I don't exactly know how USQ can do that. I know they have given away like sets of hoops in the past. But you know, that is one of the biggest things we're seeing, that if we can overcome that, get, you know, just that ability to play it in a more casual setting, I think we'll see that grow, both Black community, but also I think Quidditch in general, to be honest.
So going right off that USQ topic, how can we expect change with such a homogeneous leadership?
If we're being honest, like it's really like at their work, right? Which is, I think, really like what Tyler and I have kind of experienced in most of the comment sections of most of the forums, is that it's like, I mean, yeah, it's great that USQ and MLQ are saying that they're going to be doing this, but it's like, well, I mean, in reality, it's like, well, nothing has changed in however long the sport has been around, and inclusivity and diversity is really like what are the two pillars of the sport that get people into it, right? It's kind of something that the sport prides itself on being, and it's done a great job of that for LGBTQ plus athletes, but it's failed abysmally for players of color or non-white players. So really, like, we can really only hope to apply pressure. I mean, I think personally, like, there needs to be a transition of leadership eventually. Something sudden is not going to happen. I think it's unrealistic for that, but eventually there does need to be like seats at the table.
I would disagree with that. I think
Really?
yeah, like in where the country's at, where the world's at right now, we are in a very odd opportunity where everyone is realistically at home for a majority of the day. I think if there was ever a time to have a transfer of power, specifically like at the top of Quidditch, I would say this is now, because those commissioners whoever is stepping down in USQ would have the opportunity to realistically do a more real handoff to whoever would step in for them, as there's no Quidditch going on. There's no season happening right now. You know, all that we can do right now is plan for what's upcoming. And so I think, yeah, like if we talk about when would be the perfect time, I think if there was ever going to be a successful transfer of power, I mean, this kind of makes sense. You know, the world's kind of on a pause at the moment.
From an organizational standpoint, I would kind of disagree, partially because there actually was a fairly recent transfer of power in November, where the new executive director came in after having been the events director for several years. But even like aside from that, like what a lot of people don't realize is like even like right now, like in general, this time of year, you know, the May to like roughly August window is when they pick the locations for those events. It's when a lot of like the upper leadership is flying to all the different sites that are bidding on the different regional and nationals locations. And like in theory it might be better, and like maybe if there are like plans, like, oh, like someone said in January, I'm planning to step down in May, like if you had planned to be stepping down around this time, then yeah, it could work out relatively better compared to like November. But just like best case scenario, a completely qualified person that's able to run USQ just like pops out of the woodwork and happens to be, and like is a person of color and is like very aware of like our state of the world basically, just like is able to take over, like right now wouldn't be the best. Like you have one employee who just came in and is like still learning their role, and like she's fantastic. Her name's Laura Porth. She's amazing. You have one employee who's like has a very important job of like running all the events, but is still learning and never really got the chance to go to any events because of COVID. It's just not a great, like I think it could be made into a great time, but I don't see a scenario where that would work out as well as everyone thinks it would work out.
That's fair.
So I guess branching off of that real quick, in terms of leadership, you're saying it is quite hard to change right now, which is completely fair. Obviously, with COVID and everything, there's a lot going on. But in terms of a lower level, with like the volunteers that the sport provides, how do you as a regional coordinator and someone who's been volunteering for USQ for a while now, Katrina, how do you think we could encourage young Black players to not only stick around in the sport but also volunteer their time with it? And what do you think needs to spur that change, do you think?
Honestly, that's hard. I feel like it's an absolutely important question. Like I acknowledge that, like, as a person of color, I could definitely be working harder to try to bring more people of color in as well. Because it's like James said, like, I've had maybe one fellow person of color teammate per year on any team I've been on. Like, James was one of mine my first year. The entire time I played with Philadelphia, it was one person, and then now that I'm at Penn State, it's also one other person. And so I think, at least for me, like, I've just kind of gotten used to that. And like, obviously I want that to change, but it's like, when it's been a certain way for so long, it's just like you kind of settle into it. And like, I'm not saying it's a good thing, and like, I do want to change that, but it's what I'm used to at this point. It's just like with Penn State in general is a good example. Like, there are a little more than 40,000 undergrads at University Park. Of those undergrads, less than 6% identify as African American. So like, it's not terribly surprising there's only 2 Black players on our team. And there is technically a third person, I think about it. Sorry, Archie. But in terms of bringing more in,
No, he got erased.
but like, in terms of bringing them in, I think a good thing to point out is just like to be more visible. Like, I try to make a point of, like, when we have recruitment events, to be one of the people that is sitting at our table talking to potential recruits to come in. In terms of like volunteering for USQ, like, I do, not gonna lie, try to recruit people pretty regularly, because, you know, you always want more people to work with because it's fun, but also because like, it does kind of take a toll on you sometimes, like it being the only person of color in your workplace. And like, obviously it's different with USQ because we don't have like a physical workplace, but like, when you're working an event, or like when we're on our like staff meeting calls, it's just, it kind of sucks being one of, like, I think we have 3 total, because I think it's just me, Brandy, and Christian that are regular full-time staff, not full-time, year-round staff. I'm going to feel really bad if I forgot someone, but I'm pretty sure it's just us 3. But we have had like private discussions amongst ourselves, like, how can we bring more people of color into this organization, because it is important, because like, we are aware that it hasn't really grown, like the person of color population, I'm like conjugating that word improperly, I'm sure, but that population has not grown within the sport of Quidditch, and it really bothers us.
So I wanted to say something kind of combining the last few questions, and it's something I kind of really feel strongly about, is that we're kind of letting USQ and MLQ off the hook by saying they failed at including Black people and people of color, because that implies that they've done something to try to include Black people and people of color. As others have said, they've done an amazing job with women empowerment. They've done an amazing job with the LGBTQ plus community. And the main goal, one of the main goals of the USQ and MLQ, is to be inclusive to oppressed and minority groups. And I think somewhere across the line, or maybe it hasn't even started yet, that Black people and people of color, in my opinion, have never really been a part of that group. And I think we're seeing it now, that they're just kind of starting out. So when we talk about a change in leadership, I can't go either way right now. I can't give a definitive answer, because I see both sides of the argument. One side, I'm like, maybe it's time for a change, because I don't think they've even tried. I don't even think this is something they've even thought about until all this stuff started happening around the world, and our voices started to get louder and louder. And we kind of woke up and said, hold on a second, like what about us? What are you guys doing to get more Black people and people of color into Quidditch? And then on the other side, I'm thinking, well, you guys haven't had a shot to do it yet. You've never tried to do it yet. And now with all this going on, and with the pressure on you, like, I'm not going to leave that part out. You're being pressured to do it. And let's be honest, that's why you're doing it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Part of me is like, let's see what you do. Let's see where this goes, because you've done such a good job on other marginalized groups. Let's see what you can do for us. So like I'm not really sure what side to fall on, but those are my two thoughts on both of them.
I will also add that like they definitely could, like the league as in general, I say they, but I'm like part of it, but like I guess leadership in USQ could definitely do better. They do actually have a diversity, equity and inclusion committee. I'm not sure exactly what decisions or like plans have come out of that, but I do know like they were kind of trying, and they were trying to recruit more. I know one of the things they're working on was like just trying to do a census of the Quidditch community, just to see exactly where the numbers are, because that data just honestly doesn't exist, which again falls on the league for not having tried to collect that sooner. But there was some stuff in motion before all this, but I do genuinely think, yeah, I do agree that the league could be doing more. And I do hope something more does come out of it. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what the league could do, just because honestly, my thing is events and making sure and like bringing and just kind of being that like liaison between players in the league. And like I know what the concerns are, I just don't know how to fix them all the time.
I mean, my big thing, I guess, from like that organizational, these two big organizations, I guess, can do is like just increase that representation. I mean, we've been talking about the amount of employees that each one has on the forums and here as well. And I mean, it just doesn't feel like it's enough. And like James said, I think I didn't even think about that, but that is perfect. Like that, it wasn't something they failed at because they're not even trying. And I think that speaks even louder that they're just not the right people in the room to be able to combat this, to be able to look at the issues and say, this is like something that we can, substantially do. Even I think the posts that like MLQ and USQ have made, since I feel like those are good. Those are great that they came out and said, apologize for this being a blind spot, but like, what is kind of the action that is going to be taken with this? It's unfortunately been a lot of like people telling, it feels like people telling the Black community like, okay, well, we're going to do this, we're going to give you this. We're hearing you, but we're not going to do the things that like, you're asking us to do. We're not going to look at those things. And it just, I guess it feels like from a community that, like everyone said, that has prided itself on inclusion, and I've seen has done an incredible job. I personally feel, I guess, from a standpoint of other oppressed groups, it just feels like this isn't something that they are taking as seriously. I think, and I want to be really clear before I say this, like, I will never entertain a conversation that is comparing one oppressed group to another, saying like this deserves whatever versus this. Oppression is oppression is oppression. But it feels like if this were something that like the same issue was brought up in the LGBT community in Quidditch, I feel like this would have been something that we would have seen more people calling for action. We would have seen more people, asking for, okay, you haven't done a good job of this, you should be stepping down. One of the pillars of Quidditch is inclusion, and unfortunately we really just have not lived up to that, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I know, go on.
No, I'm sorry, Katrina, keep going.
Yeah. I was just another thing as when I to it, like I've been to the coffin. It's just like part of the problem. It's not just people of color that like we have like the league has a hard time recruiting. It's like people in general. For years we were hemorrhaging staff, and like a large part of that has definitely been like, and I'm not trying to point fingers at each of people, but like the abuse that staff gets from players in the community. Like there are times where like I admit I'm not perfect. I was responsible, or I still am responsible for a lot of the scheduling of like volunteers and occasionally referees and snitches for events. There have been times where like people have flooded my Facebook inbox, like texted me, called me, like just insulting me, saying like, you did this wrong, this isn't fair, you're biased, you're unqualified, you're stupid. Like I'm not the only one. Like, and I'm not saying like it's because I was Black, like it's staff in general. It is so hard to bring people into the lead, like on the staff in general, and like especially people of color, like especially just because of the different areas where we have to go for events, like South Carolina, Texas. I did not want to go to any of those places by myself. Part of that's just because I'm not from those areas, but like I did not want to go there alone. I always made sure that someone else from staff was always with me, and like I had my phone in my pocket fully charged. But like, I feel like we can't talk about like the lack of diversity in staff without also addressing the fact that like it is hard to bring more staff in. Like, it's just a fact. Like, people, like, players have definitely gotten better and, like, more mature, but, like, I can pull up receipts of, like, the, like, things players have said to me, like, either online or just, like, I still have, like, this vitriol, like, that was spewed at me at nationals one year by this one player that was, like, a 5-minute long rant.
Yeah, well, that's. I'm very sorry you have to go through that.
If I
But
may add to that.
yeah,
I
no,
work
of
retail,
course.
I'm used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think something that you can even tack on to that is actually like, and I think this has been discussed a lot. I think, Tyler, you've refed in the Great Lakes region and a couple of regions, right? And I think anyone that's actually refereed has probably been subjected to stuff like this by players even just on the pitch, right? Like, and yeah, you can argue, yeah, people get competitive in the heat of play, but that's not excusing the fact that there's a lot of verbal abuse subjected towards referees. And I think refereeing is like an extension of being USQ staff, right? So like getting people to referee or go through the certification process of being a referee is not necessarily easy. And the incentive of, yeah, you get paid for it is not necessarily, you can argue, worth the verbal abuse that you get hurled. Especially like I personally would not want to be reffing a game and then there's the potential of getting slurs or whatever hurled my way. I do not want to deal with that. And yeah, I think that's just an extension of what Katrina has elaborated on.
Yeah, and that's completely fair. I mean, as a ref, we've all seen what people just aim at them, and it's pretty disgusting. But as Katrina does bring up a good point about USQ, about how it was hard for them to bring in people onto staff to volunteer and stuff. But I want to take that in terms of the teams in general who are part of USQ. What should teams be doing to actually recruit more Black athletes, players of color, even women of color? Because right now it was pretty like for right now, because I knew Christian Barnes, I was able to get Katrina Bynum. We were able to get Natasha, but we're trying to look for Black women of color for the college game right now for our second roundtable, and it's proving to be pretty hard. So what do you guys think needs to be done to get more women of color involved, to get more Black athletes recruited? I meant not involved, but recruited into the college game.
Well, first I think it starts with retention for the players we have already, and making it a welcoming and inclusive environment that they would want to stay in and give back to and bring other people into. So I know personally, when I see other women of color, especially younger ones that are just getting started, I try to reach out to them and say, hey, you did really great. I pay more attention to them because I want them to, feel included. I want them to know that there's somebody else there who sees them, who's been like where they are, like the only person on their team who looks like them. And I don't want them to start to feel like disconnected. So I think we should look into supporting our Black teammates or other teammates of color, and just being more inclusive. I know that's not very specific, but just like reaching out more and trying to find out more about them as a person. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that hit it on the head, Natasha. I think like from an individual standpoint, I mean, it's about those individual interactions. I mean, we've been seeing it all over forums. It's more in the BQC group. Like those individual interactions have weighed a lot on Quidditch players who've even stayed in this community. We're not hearing from the people who have had interactions who are not in this community anymore, And I think that is the biggest thing at an individual level, from like you're a captain or a coach of a team, is, making sure that, your players are getting checked on that. Like, it is not a situation where they're being, they're being discriminated against. They have situations that they don't feel comfortable. And that starts with the leadership of your team, making sure that you are someone that every player under your umbrella feels comfortable for you to come to be that person of support. Because even though, you are a college player, you are tasked with that burden of being a leader for that community. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest one. Like Natasha was saying, you want them to feel like this is a sport that they want to give back to, that this is a place for them. And that, that starts, like I said, I think representation is huge. I think being able to see people who look like you in pictures, in even in photo spreads of like Team USA, like I think that's huge that you can see that and say, okay, this is something I can aspire to be, within this community, either as a player or like, if you're looking at someone as like Katrina or Christian Barnes as volunteer service. I think, like you want someone that you can like kind of like personally resonate with and see, okay, this is someone who I can vibe with, who I can like see myself in that position in the near future. And I mean, those are to me, like, I think the biggest things. Also, I mean, I think the Black community as a whole, like, Natasha said, like, if you're on a team, I mean, if you are like that one Black person on a team, we as a Black community have to do a better job personally, I think, as well. Like, I know we had whatever the Black group used to be. I found it like a few years ago and it was pretty dead. Like we started a new one, BQC, Black Quidditch Coalition. Please, like, I would recommend any players joining it just to, see that, there are other people that are going through the similar stuff. Like I said, we have some conversations that are similar to AQD, some that are not. And we're going to be trying to do stuff more in the future. But, I think we need to be a resource there as well. And we're trying to build that out right now. And that can be huge. So it's really just making, like Natasha said, making them feel like this is something that they want to be a part of, want to get back to.
I think for me, I feel like it's kind of a catch-22 situation, because it's like, in order to recruit more people of color, you kind of have to have some people of color, because like part of what helps me choose what things to be involved in is like, am I going to be the only like Black person in the room? Like, am I going to like feel uncomfortable? Like that kind of thing. But then I think another part of it too, like unrelated to that, is also like, I feel like, honestly, let's just call it what it's like, white leadership on teams needs to learn how to be more understanding of the issues that Black players face on their team. Because like, coming back to what I mentioned before, it's like, I flat out told one of my captains, like, I think this player is racist and it makes me uncomfortable to be on the team. Like, can you please do something about it? And they're like, well, what proof do you have? And and most of what I had was like microaggressions, and like to that captain, he was just like, well, I mean, he didn't call you the N-word, so like, what can we really do about it? And it's like, you could have done a lot more. There's just so, like, even if you didn't want to kick him off the team, like, there's just so much more you could have done between like doing nothing and kicking him off,
Yeah, I think for so like, I think I alluded to this, like I was on a podcast for racial representation with Matt Dwyer, and I did talk about this, that like when I came to MSU's main recruiting event for like various clubs, like Nico Banks, who is like the only player of color, was someone that like I talked to, that I became friends with quickly, and was one of the reasons that like he was my seeker coach. So he was a kindred spirit, really, right? Like we were the two of the only people, and then another one joined later. So it was like three of us, which is great. So teams need to have more players of color, or players of even like different, like non-white ethnicities, right? In order to, like, it needs to be diverse so that you can recruit more, right? Because otherwise it just looks like tokenism, which just isn't great, right? It's like, we're going to recruit you because, well, why? Because you're Black, right? It's just not going to work. So, yeah. And I mean, even if you look at the national level, right? Like, I think in 2016, like James, you were announced as the head coach for Team USA, and then Tyler, you were announced on the team, and that was absolutely inspirational for me as a player of color, right? Like the head coach of the national team was a person of color, and then a player on the team was a player of color, right? So like those are steps that can be elaborated upon, right? And like now it's like, well, there's only Quincy Hildreth, and it's like, well, now it's like you're not necessarily guaranteed playing time, but that's an entirely different issue. But I think there are ways you can concretely highlight players of color in the sport that makes them all, like the ones that are there, feel valued, but it also makes it easier to recruit, in my opinion.
And that's a great point that you bring up, because last week I actually was in a conversation with another college player, and he was a team captain for his team, and he was very well intentioned. He was listening to everything, and his main concern was, it's like you said, the tokenism aspect of it. How do I get the people that I already have on my team, and how do I reach out to them? And if let's just say this person hadn't reached out like in the 2-3 years that they've known him about stuff, but then suddenly reach out to them now, he was worried that this might seem like disingenuous. So what would you guys say to the leadership of a team who want to reach out, but they're worried about how the optics would look about only reaching out at this stage of where we're at in the world?
Well, first of all, don't wait till now. Go on, sorry. Go on, Natasha, I'm sorry.
No, you can finish. You can finish if you're not, or were you?
No, I guess what I was going to say was, like, I feel like a lot of white people, like, especially ones that didn't grow up in a really diverse area, will, like, look at talking to people of color as if they're, like, from another country. And, like, they need to, like, change, like, their cadence and, like, their diction and, like, the slang and just talk to them differently. And it's like, if you want more people of color to join your team, don't, like, have, like, this is hypothetical, where it's like, say it's like an involvement fair for a college, and like maybe a person of color is like walking by and like they see you talking to a white person to try to recruit, and then you turn around and just talk completely differently to that black person, like they're stupid, or like just, I don't know, whatever kind of assumption you come up with. Like, no, talk to us like we're people. Like it shouldn't need explaining, but it honestly does, because it's happened to me before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Also, as far as how to approach current players without seeming disingenuous, I would say just be upfront about it. Just say, yeah, the conversation's happening right now made me realize that this is something that I was lacking in. This is something that I had misstepped on, and I'm working to correct that now. And then just ask for their input and really listen. Don't just like, okay, well, check that off my list of things to do today. Like, actually, like, see what this player needs from you and work on like getting changes in motion.
Yeah, I think if you're starting to look at that issue right now as a leader of a predominantly white team, I mean, you are just kind of going to be fighting an uphill battle. That's just kind of where it's at right now. I think, this is put in the spotlight right now, and I think that because it's being put in the spotlight, you can't just kind of go and be like, hey, casually, like, it's something that I think Natasha said it like pretty point blank. You need to be genuine about it at this point. If you're going to recruit, say, hey, we made this mistake. This is something we're trying to correct going forward. We don't want this to be, how our team is made up of. And I think that takes a lot to kind of swallow that, especially if, you're a college player. I think that's kind of tough, and that takes a decent amount of maturity to kind of step out and admit that this has been an issue that you now need to correct.
And we will start wrapping it up. I do have a few more questions. So recently, in the last 2 days, we saw Mike Madonna spearhead the Black Athlete Recruitment Program. For those unfamiliar, this is a program where Mike and other people in the Quidditch community are pledging trial and full memberships to new Black recruits for next year. Tyler, you commented on this post, and you said that this is a great initiative and that this is one of many barriers from getting Black athletes. So would you be able to tell us, and obviously everyone else can chime in, well, what are the barriers that that the listeners and viewers should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. We did kind of discuss it a little bit, but I mean, I kind of always like bring it back to something like basketball that is so easily accessible that really you need a basketball and to find a court somewhere to be able to play, practice that craft, you shoot around and dream that you're going to grow up and be Michael Jordan. It's really hard to do that with Quidditch. You need realistically a lot of equipment. That's, I mean, one of the biggest barriers to entry. And that's really not feasible. I mean, like, there's very specific situations where you're an individual player who has access to a set of hoops that you can go practice with on your own at your leisure. And so, you need to have avenues that people can come and casually play. And I guess this is getting into like a bigger kind of like on the hill stand for me, but I think like what we've seen over the last couple of years is like a huge demonizing of the club Quidditch scene. When I think it has a great opportunity to be able to really kind of like Quidditch from, you know, this issue that we're talking about right now, because they have the resources, they have the ability to kind of look at like, okay, you know, where are we going to go want to recruit from? Whereas, you know, college students don't always have that opportunity, don't always have that time, maybe not are in the right area that people are, you know, the right people of color aren't interested in that area. But, you know, you see club sports or club teams being predominantly in major cities, have that opportunity to go and look at like kind of their demographic and look at ways that they can realistically adjust that. And, you know, meme has been full-blown adults. You know, if you're a full-blown adult, it's a lot easier to be able to kind of go and influence your own community as opposed to, you know, a college student who maybe isn't even like from that place. Your campus might be, what's it called, a liberal oasis, you know, inside of that community. You may not be able to impact that community as a college player who that campus is entrusted by, you know, the surrounding neighborhood. And so, like, you know, that's one of the biggest barriers to entry is I think we have been demonizing the club sport. I think the hoops, the cost of just playing a Quidditch tournament, the fact that, you know, it is a lot of travel is required to even be, you know, considered one of the top players, but let alone like kind of understand the game more on a whole. It takes a ton of time to, you know, go find videos, to look at the sport like more critically. And I think it's something that in general, like the sport has not done a great job of, but I think like organizations also specifically like can look at combating like those costs that we're talking about, those financial burdens that would keep a player from continuing the sport in any capacity.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to what Tyler said, since Tyler commented on that same thread. Mike Madonna did message me afterwards about like what might possibly be done. And like, I think personally that like that trial membership, full membership kind of thing is actually really a great is a great start. I think something that can be done organizationally in the future is like an actual fundraiser or something like that on an organizational level to actually like sponsor these memberships possibly, right? Because the cost of membership in addition to travel is a major expense that some players that enter college, like I know for me, like it wasn't necessarily easy because you're paying club dues and whatnot. So that is a burden that does have to get met. So I think that's something that can be done in addition to that. And yeah, as Tyler said before, the club community, as contentious as it may be, a lot of the people that are funding those trial memberships are club players. And I think that's something that people may have to realize in the collegiate community, that like a lot of the club players are alumni of universities. They probably have full-time jobs and they can do this. So I think it's honestly up to the community scene or club scene, I guess, to step up and actually like save the club, college community.
So I was asked about one of my opinions from one of the leaders of USQ and MSQ as well about what exactly can be done to get more Black players in here. And I also echoed the part that, well, we need to be able to pay for trial memberships, pay for memberships, get them experience to make sure they get their feet in, see if they like it. And then if they like it and they keep getting those experiences, they'll stay in the sport. But I don't know if you guys remember, I know Katrina, you probably do, back when we had state representatives on the USQ level. And I was one of the state representatives and for Maryland. And I reached out to Bowie State and nothing really came of it. And when I was kind of in charge of DCQC, we went to Howard University and hung flyers and everything. We got some emails back, but nothing really came out of that. But what I don't see from USQ specifically, and I think you're right that club teams need to be like the spearhead of this, is going into HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. People always recruit from predominantly white colleges in the area, and we don't see a lot of people going to recruit at these historically Black colleges and universities. A lot of people don't know I started playing Quidditch at University of Maryland as a graduate student. I'm a product of a HBCU. So I think more club teams need to go and recruit from HBCUs. That's how a lot of college teams get started, actually. People go and recruit from them, they play for the club team, and then they end up taking it back to their college and building teams there. Like, I really think it needs to be a focus of USQ and club teams to get into historically Black colleges, and recruit from then on, and then you can get more players into the league, and then you can get more college teams built that way. As I said, we've had a lot of state representatives and people go out and recruit. We've even had the USQ themselves go out and recruit at colleges and try to build teams. But you haven't seen them go to those campuses and those colleges to kind of build teams. So I'd like to see them do more of that as well.
Okay, guys, we will be wrapping it up. We just have 2 more questions left. So, James, coming back to you real quick, and I know, Tyler, you're also a coach right now. I think, is anyone else a coach on the panel? I don't think so at the active
Not
moment.
anymore.
Right. So I guess this question could be answered in 2 ways, in 2 perspectives actually. Where if a coach is listening to this and they have a Black athlete on their team, how would, I guess this goes back to the team captain thing, but like how would a coach essentially coach that player? And as players, as you guys were all players, how would you have wanted a coach to treat you as a player, or just treat you as like as a human being?
I mean, you pretty much said it. Just treat me like the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to talk to me differently. You don't have to coach me differently. Just treat me like a regular member of the team. And I think that's important, and that builds a relationship with the coach, because sometimes you may not be reffed as any other player. You may not be talked about as just another player. But if you have someone in a leadership position that, treats you just like everyone else, coaches you like anyone else, stands up for you just like any other player, I mean, that's really all you have to do. You don't have to do anything extravagant or off the wall. Just treat me like any other player.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's what I think everyone is asking for, is just for equality. We don't want to feel like we're getting, special treatment or like being like babied, but like at the same time, we don't want to be more discriminated against or like treated like unfairly in those exact situations. I mean, if it's something you struggle with, I mean, you can try to take it to like a very analytical standpoint. If you have the time for that, like I know one of my co-coaches, Andrew Axel, like he had a whole system that he would, stats break down like every player's minutes, goals, turnovers, everything. And that like gave us an opportunity to look at it, off a number standpoint, not just like, okay, how do we feel about these players? So if that's something you struggle with, I mean, you can always try to go like at the analytical route of it. There's always, I always say kind of like, there is some story like between the numbers, but like generally that's like a good place to start. Look at like SWOT analysis. I mean, that's something that like I've always tried to implement to the teams. It's a good way to kind of like see where, this player does thrive, or versus like, especially if you're able to look at film, like where does this player struggle at, in like a more formal, organized sense that you can kind of like bring that data in. It's tough because, I mean, coaches aren't paid. You're asking someone to, look at, 30 some players and just like think about them, critically, analytically. And like, these are some ways that I think you can kind of like give yourself like more support in that area. I will say like kind of the most effective way though is what James said. Look at them as a person. The best coach I think I've had and was able to coach alongside was Nathan Digman for Intensity. And I mean, he just treated each person on our team like they were a real person. He talked to them. He knew about them. He made a personal connection with them. And so if something, was going wrong, like if, a person acted out of practice, it was like, okay, I know that this person is dealing with this behind the scenes, that is able to, talk to them about that. And I think just understanding each individual player's, like what they're going through, their personal biases, tendencies, like I think that is crucial, especially now as a coach.
And I guess the last question is, what does progress look like for you? Where right now we don't want to be having these discussions on AQD and everyone's all very on board with it, but 3 months from now, once the season starts again, we don't want it to just be all talk. So what do you envision happening from these discussions that we're all having in the community? And hopefully, I think that because this is the last question, I would like everyone to answer this, if possible.
I think the amount of effort that that various players put in to like not misgender someone, like I wish they would put that, like, or at least let me rephrase that. Progress to me would look like them putting that kind of effort into making sure their players of color felt like comfortable in that same sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, like, we've seen a ton of stuff being put out by all the major organizations, like, within the community. I mean, I just want to see follow through on a lot of their initiatives that they're talking about. More concrete plans from USQ, like what MLQ is doing an audit and is part of the diversity council or independent committee, whatever's going on there. You know, you need to see like kind of something of substance from there. I also think, like, from the individual standpoint, you know, if we start like calling this stuff out, we start hitting this stuff at the individual level, I mean, realistically, we're not going to see it. And that's more what a lot of people are looking for, is not seeing that kind of discrimination or microaggressions.
Yeah, I agree. That's what progress looks like to me as well. Less, I guess, less othering for players of color and for Black players, and more focused on us as people.
I want to see just concrete improvement in their effort in diversifying the sport in terms of Black people and people of color. Like, as we talked about earlier, there hasn't necessarily been a plan or an initiative of them trying to move this forward. And now they're saying that they're making this plan initiative. I wanna see them follow through on it. We might not see the numbers increase in the first year or two, but I want to see that they make sure they actually put the effort in and actually start trying to do it.
Yeah, I think James pretty much hit it smack on the nail for me, because I mean, USQ has done USQ and MLQ have both put out these statements of what they intend on doing, and as you said, we might not see like the numerical results for some time, because we still have to wait on recruitment numbers essentially. But I would definitely love to see like concrete, like organizational, like people involved in at an organizational level, and like action plans.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your Monday night. It's genuinely been a pleasure to have you guys all on. I've learned a lot. I know our viewers will definitely feel the same way. This isn't done. This is a learning process for everyone listening. Thank you for listening. That's the first step. You were able to take part in this, hopefully, community change that will happen in the next few years. And hopefully we can build a foundation where everyone feels like they're being valued in this community that we all love, honestly, because we've all stuck with the sport. We've all risen to prominence in the sport, and to take those next step in where everyone feels included is a very important next step, I guess. It's a terrible way to end it, but thank you guys all so much for listening and talking, and thank you guys for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.